All right, what's going on, guys? My name is Noah Daniel, and in today's video, I'm gonna be telling you 80% of what you need to know to build your best physique in 20 minutes or less. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Essentially what we have in front of us right here is a mind map that I kind of created, and this has a lot of the techniques and principles that I've done research on and pieced together from different sources to kind of hone them down into the three categories of training, nutrition, and recovery. So I'm kind of just going to go over all of them really quickly. I'm not going to necessarily go super in depth into all of them because, again, I'm trying to keep the video kind of short so that you get a good overview without just totally taking up too much of your time. So in no specific order, not necessarily out of importance or anything, I want to talk about training first because I think a lot of people get a lot of things in their training wrong just because there's a lot of misinformation and just overall misconceptions that people have about what effective training actually looks like. So let's start there. When it comes to training, the first question that we really want to ask is what exactly drives muscle growth? Previously, people thought that things like muscle damage or metabolic stress were drivers of muscle growth. Like, for example, they would say, oh, when you go to the gym, you tear the fibers in your muscle and the fibers get torn down and they build back stronger and bigger and stuff like that. But realistically, that's actually not the mechanism that's happening that is creating muscle growth, and it's just not how the body works. And again, without getting too much into the detail, what the research and recent studies are showing us is that what the actual true driver of muscle growth is something called mechanical tension. So you might be asking, what exactly is mechanical tension? So really quickly, the scientific definition is going to be the pulling force that muscle fibers experience when they are trying to shorten. Mechanical tension is going to increase with the involuntary decrease in contraction velocity. Now, this might sound like just word soup to you. It might not make sense. So let me give you the example of the bench press. Let's say I pick a weight, 225, that I can do for 10 reps. And 10 reps would be where the spot that I fail at, and I wouldn't be able to do additional reps. Those first 1 to 5 reps are probably going to be pretty quick. Like, I'll be able to be pretty explosive, get the weight up pretty quickly. But as I get closer to failure on reps like 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, that contraction velocity, the speed of which I'm going to be able to push the weight up, is going to start going down. Not necessarily out of me intentionally slowing down how fast I'm contracting the muscle, but it's going to be involuntary because as my body gets closer and closer to failure, it's going to need to recruit more and more muscle fibers in order to be able to lift that same weight. And as we get really close to failure, our body's going to have essentially recruited almost as many muscle fibers as it can, and all of those fibers are going to be experiencing tension. And when they experience that tension, that is what is going to drive growth. So once we've answered that question, we can then move on to how can we experience mechanical tension as frequently as possible while minimizing fatigue? So this is really going to come down to kind of three things, and that's going to be one, our exercise selection, which is the exercises that we actually choose to do to train different muscle groups. Then two is going to be the frequency that we do it with, how often we train those muscle groups. And then three is going to be the intensity that we train with. And that's going to be kind of like our rate of perceived exertion and training close to failure, but we'll talk about that in a second. So let's start with exercise selection. When it comes to picking exercises that we want to do in our training program, we're going to want to pick ones that are going to target the muscles we want to grow and also ones that we can properly progressively overload in. So what does progressive overload look like? Let's say, for example, on the bench press again, I can do 225 for 6 reps. One example of progressive overload would be coming in the next session and then doing that for 7 reps. I did the same amount of weight for more reps, which means I progressively overloaded that exercise. Another way to progressively overload is by increasing the weight. So let's say I keep progressing in reps until I get to 9 reps, and then I want to go back down to my rep range of 6 to 8. If I then put 235 on the bar and I do that for 6 reps, that means I progressed because before I was only doing 225. So those are kind of the only 2 ways that you're going to progressively overload. Decreasing your rest time in between sets or even adding more sets is not really a metric of progressive overload that you can use to gauge muscle growth. So I would just stick to those 2 methods of progressive overload. And then in addition to that, we want to focus on choosing stable exercises. So what does that mean? Let's take the squat, for example. It's a good exercise for training the quads, the glutes, the adductors, all that. But at the same time, it's a exercise that has a huge stability demand. So a lot of core strength is involved, a lot of other stabilizing muscles in the legs are involved. that are not necessarily the ones that we want to drive hypertrophy towards to, again, build our most aesthetic physique. So we want to pick exercises that are more stable and kind of take the stability aspect out of the exercise. So for example, if you compare a Smith machine squat to a free weight squat, the Smith machine squat has the weight locked into a track, which is going to add that increased stability and make sure that we can put more of our central nervous system and overall perceived effort into those specific muscle groups that we want to train, not necessarily those additional peripheral muscles like our core and the stabilizing muscles. So overall, we just want to choose those more stable exercises so that we can, again, maximize the effort in what we actually want to grow. That's pretty much it for exercise selection. So now we can move on to frequency, and this is something that a lot of people can kind of get messed up on, and this is where your training split is going to come into play, and also your volume is going to come into play. So a lot of people right now are doing a lot more volume than they actually need in order to effectively grow a muscle. And it's actually in your best effort to stay within a lower volume range, because if you're doing too much volume, you're just acquiring a bunch of fatigue that's gonna hinder your progress because you're not gonna be able to perform 100% when you're coming back into the gym for your next session. So again, without getting too much into the details, you pretty much wanna be doing 4 to 6 direct working sets per muscle per week. So what does that mean? Let's say for my chest, in any given week, I want to do a maximum of 6 sets of direct chest work. So for example, in my program, I do about 2 sets of a pressing movement in one of my upper days and 1 fly movement. So that's 3 sets. And then in my other upper day movement, I do 2 sets for chest. So in a whole week, I'm only doing 5 sets for chest. And that's pretty much the upper limit of what's actually going to drive growth. If I keep adding more sets onto that, I'm just going to be acquiring more fatigue. That's going to increase my recovery time. And it means the next time that I come into the gym, I'm probably not going to be fully recovered and won't be able to push 100% to, again, drive that mechanical tension, drive that muscle growth that we want to do. So once we have that in mind, we then want to pick a split that is going to allow us to hit each muscle group at least 2 times a week. I would say 2 to 3 times a week is a good reference to start at. With that in mind, you are pretty much going to be doing either an upper-lower split or a full body split. I personally do an upper-lower split because I find it more just enjoyable and more fun to train with. And if you're doing an upper-lower split, you kind of want to have 2 to 3 rest days in your program. So mine, for example, is an upper-lower and then a rest day, and then upper rest, lower rest. You could also do this upper-lower rest, upper-lower with then 2 rest days at the end, but that's kind of just personal preference. When you're training like this, you want to emphasize a different muscle group each day. So for example, since in a week I have 2 upper days and 2 lower days, 1 upper day is more pushing focused, 1 upper day is more pulling focused, 1 lower day is more quad focused, and 1 lower day is more hamstring focused. Just because if you have them looking the exact same way, there's a lot of different muscle groups in your upper body and your lower body, and it's kind of unrealistic to be able to evenly distribute that volume all in one workout and that look the same from your upper 1 and upper 2 day. So for that reason, I would just recommend emphasizing 1 muscle group on one day and 1 muscle group on the other day. So that same principle is also going to apply if you're doing full body. I would recommend training every other day. And then again, you're going to want to emphasize a different muscle group on each day. Just because you have so many different muscle groups in your body, it would be unrealistic to do 2 sets of every single muscle in one workout. So you're going to kind of want to bias different ones on each day. Then we come to intensity, which I think is one of the most important parts. And when it comes to intensity, there can be different definitions and stuff, but I would mainly just try to think of it as training close to failure. Because if you're training close to failure, that means your intensity should be good. And what exactly does training close to failure look like? So we have something called the 5 simulating reps model. And this is essentially saying that in any given set, the 5 reps that come essentially before failure are the only ones that are actually going to drive muscle growth. So for example, if I'm doing 10 reps on the bench press, those first 1 through 5 reps are not actually providing that much, if anything, towards me actually growing my chest. It's really that 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 that are actually driving growth. Because again, those are usually the ones where that contraction velocity is slowing down and we're actually placing mechanical tension on all the fibers. So that's something to keep in mind. We do want to be training close to failure to actually get stimulating reps towards muscle growth. And in addition to this, this kind of ties into the reps in reserve that we have in our sets. So let's say I can do a certain weight for 10 reps on the bench press. Staying between the 0 to 2 IR would mean stopping a little bit short of failure so that I don't accumulate too much fatigue. Because if you train to failure in every single set that you're doing, you are kind of accumulating a little bit more fatigue than you actually need to effectively get enough stimulus for the muscle to grow. So I would recommend just staying within the 0 to 2 RIR range and then occasionally training to failure just to make sure you are actually still pushing yourself. Because a lot of the times if you just stay, again, 1 to 2 RIR, you might not actually be pushing as hard as you think you could be. So you might think you're pushing as hard as you can when in reality you could push a little bit harder. So occasionally throw in some training to failure just to keep yourself in check and make sure you're actually using a proper RIR estimate. But when it comes to training with intensity and training like heavier and stuff like that, you're gonna wanna make sure that you are putting adequate rest time between your sets. So this is going to mean different things for different people and different things for different muscle groups. But for example, I like to keep 3 minutes as like a good like kind of minimum rule and 5 minutes as like a maximum. But again, this can vary from person to person. So you really just want to make sure that you are properly like recovering and it feels like your muscles are ready for the next set versus going into the next set still a little bit fatigued, either cardiovascular or within that local muscle group. Now, with all that in mind, we kind of want to tie back into the 5 stimulating reps model. If we know that only 5 of those reps in a set are going to cause growth, there's really no point in doing 12, 13, 14, a bajillion reps in an exercise because only 5 of them are going to cause growth. So what some people have done and what I've incorporated in my training is sticking to kind of a 4 to 8 rep range. That way we are starting off the very beginning of our set with stimulating reps. Like if I do 5 reps on a single set for an exercise, it means that very first rep is already a stimulating rep towards muscle growth, and I don't have to like waste time doing a bunch of reps that aren't really doing anything for me and just accumulating like junk volume and again, extra fatigue. So I would highly recommend staying within the 4 to 8 rep range. The only time I kind of go outside of that is if there's certain exercises where it kind of just doesn't feel good to go heavy on and maybe my joints haven't like built up strong enough yet to handle like heavier weights. But usually I'll only do higher reps for a little bit on that before trying to switch to a lower rep scheme so I can minimize fatigue, minimize extra volume that I don't need. So that's pretty much it in terms of your training, and there's definitely more nuances and things like that that can go into this, and you could definitely dive into a lot more depth and think about different stuff. But again, I'm trying to keep the video a little bit short, so don't want to go too much in depth, but this should give you everything that you need to maybe make some tweaks in your programming to actually start making effective progress towards your goals. So now that we're done with that, we will move on to the nutrition section. So this is just going to be a brief overview of your overall nutrition, and I kind of broke this up into the macronutrients, the micronutrients, and your water or hydration. So to start off with the macronutrients, the thing that everybody's like most wondering about is like how much protein should I be eating? The good rule of thumb to follow, I would recommend, is 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So if I weigh 175 pounds, I'm trying to eat around 175 to maybe like 200 grams of protein a day. That's going to be like a good gauge to make sure I'm properly stimulating muscle protein synthesis throughout the day and I have enough resources for my body to actually build the muscle. So when it comes to choosing protein sources, we want to choose ones that are nutrient dense, that are going to have a lot of the micronutrients that we want, and are also highly bioavailable. So I like to pick these from stuff like dairy, lean red meats, fish, and eggs, but this can kind of vary on preference. I would just do some research and make sure that the sources of protein that you have in your diet are actually good whole protein sources rather than getting like a bunch of plant protein and stuff, which might not be super bioavailable. When it comes to supplementation like whey, I only recommend filling gaps with whey rather than like relying on whey to get a protein intake. So I always prioritize getting it from whole foods and like meats and things like that. And then I'll just like have a whey protein shake if I feel like I'm a little bit low on protein for the day. But it is a super affordable form of protein. So if that is a factor for you, that's definitely something helpful to have. I'll talk about fats first. When it comes to fats, they are important for both energy and hormone regulation. So for example, I would set a minimum fat intake for usually like, this is probably more important when you're cutting, to stay at least 1/3 of your body weight in grams of fat. Because if you go too far below this, you're going to start running into issues with hormone balance and sleep and things like that. And once that gets messed up, it can totally mess up your progress. So focus on getting fats from like good, again, whole foods, the leaner red meats and things like that, and then maybe like avocados or nuts. But you don't want to just be eating like a ton of like trans fat or like super processed foods like fast food, because that's going to have just a bunch of like junk that doesn't really have, again, those micronutrients that your body needs to properly produce energy and regulate its hormones. And then we're going to go over to carbohydrates. So these are going to be mostly your body's like primary form of energy. Yes, your body can use other stuff, like it can convert protein into carbs to use as energy, or it can use fat as energy as well. But carbohydrates are like usually your body's preferred source of fuel. So throughout the day, I recommend eating complex carbs like quinoa, potatoes, rice. Rice maybe is a little bit more of a simple carb, but oats and stuff like that. And filling in your like energy needs throughout the day with complex carbs. And then right before your workout, I would recommend simple carbs like fruits or cereal bars or cereal, things like that. Just so you get those like quick sugary carbs that are going to give you that immediate energy you need for a workout. I have a note at the bottom to fill in leftover calories, and this is kind of more for people that are cutting, because essentially you have a protein goal you want to hit and you have a fat goal that you want to hit, and then whatever remainder calories you have left in your budget, I guess you could say, you're going to want to fill those in with carbs so that you have, again, enough energy to properly do workouts and progress and stuff in that. So after that, we will move on to micronutrients. So this can essentially be broken down into vitamins and minerals, I would say. And when it comes to vitamins, you can take like a multivitamin. That's always like something helpful to make sure you're covering all your bases. But I would recommend, again, trying to get these vitamins from just your diet overall. So that's going to come from vegetables, leafy greens, again, those high nutrient dense protein sources we talked about earlier, and then complex carbohydrates. Vitamins are going to help keep everything in check, make sure you're healthy. They're important for brain function and a bunch of different stuff. Then we can move on to minerals, and I think this is something that a lot of people overlook because one, it ties into hydration, and two, it ties into like direct performance in the gym. So sodium has kind of been villainized in like the mainstream media, and I think it's maybe rightly so, but also wrongly so, because I think a lot of the concern is that if you're eating a bunch of like fast food or processed foods and things like that, you're going to have a bunch of preservatives and like additional, like, I don't want to say fake sodium, but it's kind of just like junk sodium in your diet. I believe that can be unhealthy. But when you're eating a healthy diet with a lot of whole foods and stuff like that, a lot of the times you're not actually getting enough sodium for what your body needs, especially if you're athletic or like do sports and like train frequently. Your body needs sodium and potassium in order for your muscles to function and contract properly. So it's important that when you are eating a healthier diet, you are properly like salting your foods, getting enough potassium from sources like bananas, kiwis, sweet potatoes, coconut water. There's a bunch of different sources and stuff like that. But just try to get enough of those and balance them out. And this is going to look a little bit different for everybody because people are different sizes, have different needs. But I would play around with that and see like where your performance and where you really feel the best, because I have personally noticed that when I'm on like low electrolytes, my gym performance suffers significantly. So it's something to play around with, and essentially you want to find like kind of like a happy medium that you can consistently stick to overall like benefit your progress. The third one is going to be magnesium, and a lot of people don't get enough of this through their diet. So it's something that I usually recommend supplementing, just because it's also important for brain function and performance and just things in general. So I usually take like a supplement for magnesium just before bed, but that's something to consider. And then those same minerals are kind of going to tie into your hydration aspect. You don't necessarily need to hit a super specific number based on like your weight or something for how much water you need to drink, but you kind of just want to drink like enough water to where you feel hydrated. And I know that's maybe not is super helpful, but again, like I said, it's going to look very different for everybody. So my recommendation would just be to make sure you're drinking water frequently throughout the day, but make sure you're also getting in those electrolytes, because if you're just drinking water and you don't have any electrolytes, your body really isn't actually going to hold on to any of that water. It's just going to go straight through your system, and you're not actually properly getting hydrated. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people overlook. So just keep that in mind. But pretty much, again, you can get really deep into nutrition and talk a lot about different stuff, but I'm trying to keep it short and just like a broad overview. So if you keep all those things in mind, you should be good to go. So yeah, with that, we will then move on to recovery. So this is actually something I think a lot of people overlook and don't actually realize the importance that it has. And just to start off, I want to touch on sleep because I genuinely think that that is one of the most important, it's probably the most important thing on this entire mind map in my opinion, not just for the goal of building your better physique, but just overall like your life. You can look at the countless studies that there are of people that get like 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night. You are quite literally just taking years off your life, decreasing your brain performance, decreasing your body's performance, and just really messing yourself up. So I highly recommend getting at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. In addition to this, being able to have a consistent sleep schedule is really important. Essentially, if you're sleeping at all different times, your body's kind of confused on when to release all the hormones and stuff like melatonin for when your body tells you it's time to go to sleep, or also growth hormone and stuff like that. It's important to have a consistent schedule so that your body releases those hormones like on a consistent basis at the same time. And that's really important for, again, brain function and recovering and all that good stuff. The other important thing is managing your stress. So obviously, especially in like the day and age that we live in, we do live pretty stressful lives and there's a lot of stuff that we can't avoid. So my overall recommendation for managing cortisol levels is one, doing as much as you can to provide yourself an environment where it's going to be low stress, but two, also finding activities in certain things, whether it be like meditation or like reading a book or like listening to podcasts, like things like that, that can kind of de-stress you or take you away from the stressful stuff in life and just give you like your body kind of a time to like just relax and recover and stuff like that. That also again ties into environment, and something that's important that I think people overlook is like the people that you surround yourself with. So if I'm friends with a bunch of people who just want to go out and party and drink and do all that kind of stuff, not necessarily saying that there's anything wrong with that, but in terms of like my goals and recovering and again like sleeping properly and getting my diet right and everything like that, that's probably not going to be super conducive to my goals, and it's going to make it harder for me to stay on track and stay consistent with that. And I'm not saying that you can't hang around with those people at all, or you can't do those things yourself, but it's just important to keep in mind and like everything in moderation and within your goals so that you can actually achieve what you want to achieve. And then finally, just to talk a little bit about like your rest days, because that is an important part of your programming that we talked about earlier. Make sure you have enough rest days and you're not just like going to the gym 6 days in a row with only one rest day in the week. You're not recovering fast enough to be able to sustain that. And it's not necessarily like a requirement that you do stuff like active recovery and like stretches or like go into the gym and do some sort of thing on days that you're resting, because again, we just want to provide our body with an environment to kind of like de-stress both physically and mentally and kind of just like take a break so it can actually do the building that it needs to do. But overall, that's pretty much everything that's important when it comes to recovery. Again, you could go into a lot more detail and stuff like that, but this is just a broad overview. So yeah, and then everything is going to tie into one big thing that links everything together. And that is going to be consistency and time. All right. People really underplay or underestimate how important consistency and time is. Let me just put it this way. If you take everything that I just gave you and you do all of it 50% right, but you can do that 100% of the time, you are going to have better results than the person who does all of these things 100% right, but only 50% of the time. So being able to be consistent and actually do this for a long period of time is really going to be the number one factor when it comes to determining your success in terms of, again, getting a better physique, being more healthy, being just better overall. So really keep that in mind and remember it's okay to not do all of these things 100% right, but it's important to find patterns that can help you get as consistent as possible and do this over a long period of time, because that is what's going to put you in the best position for success. So overall, I think that's pretty much everything. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. I'm always happy to answer them. And I hope you got something out of this video and hope to see you guys in some future videos. So, all right, I'm currently editing the video right now and I just wanted to touch on a few things real quick. I didn't really give a summary yet for, you know, those people who have super short attention spans and can't absorb that much information in 20 minutes. So really quickly, I just want to go through a brief summary of like what the important parts are in each group. All right, so first up, we got training. 4 to 6 sets per week per muscle. So if I'm doing chest, again, the upper limit for growth is going to be around like 6 sets. Anything more than that, just getting extra fatigue and not really helping my growth. Frequency is always going to beat out volume. So don't focus on trying to get a bunch of volume in one workout for a muscle group and then not train that for a while. Try to focus on training that muscle group more frequently throughout the week. The rep range you want to stick to is overall 4 to 8 rep range. You don't necessarily have to stick dead fast to that, but I would try to keep most of your work within there and try to be at around 0 to 2 RAR. So like 1 to 2 reps in reserve before failure. And then use failure every so often, but just kind of as a metric to make sure you're actually pushing yourself and just to give yourself kind of a mental point for, okay, this is how far I can go. Now I know what my actual 1 RIR is. Nutrition, the basis is aim for 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Try to get as much of your daily intake for calories from whole foods rather than if it fits your macros and just eating a bunch of junk. And don't forget, electrolytes and vitamins are crucial for your performance and your proper hydration. Then when it comes to recovery, number one thing above everything, sleep is your life, protected at all costs. It's kind of like in Star Wars when Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Anakin, he's like, your lightsaber is your life.
This weapon is your life.
Well, your sleep is your life. So that is the absolute number one thing. Get 7 to 9 hours of sleep, get a consistent sleep schedule, make sure you're getting good quality sleep too. Yeah. Then make sure we're creating like a de-stressing environment, keep those cortisol levels low so we can keep our other good hormones pretty high. Rest days are absolutely crucial to growth. Don't do the whole 6 days a week, 1 day of rest. You can't sustain that, I promise. And then just do your best to create an overall environment that's going to be conducive to your goals. That's just going to help your progress overall. And don't forget, these tips are for any age, any gender. Doesn't matter what your training style is or anything like that. You can incorporate a lot of these techniques. And yeah, that's pretty much the video. And that's actually the end of the video. So again, hope you got something good out of it, and we'll see you in some future ones. Peace.